So, in the past 3 months, I've read some fantastic books and some absolutely dreadful ones. Don't you want to know which ones are which? Of course you do. You're a normal person. So, join me and we're going to talk all about it. The first book I read this year was The Wedding People by Alison Esbach. I gave this 5 stars. I absolutely loved it. So this book is definitely a book that is better going into it blind. So I'm just going to give you the very tiny synopsis that I heard that made me want to read it. So this book follows Phoebe, who is going to stay at this really nice hotel so she can kill herself. And at this hotel, she meets this bride who is having her wedding at the hotel. And it kicks off from there. So if that doesn't make you want to read it, I don't know what else will. But it's a very interesting premise, and the book was executed beautifully. It was such a funny book. I didn't really expect it to be that funny, but the tone was hilarious. And then there's obviously like some very kind of deeper themes going on about Phoebe's suicide and kind of being in those two different places where you have one person who's looking to end their life and then someone else who's starting like a new important chapter in their life. So that was a really interesting contrast between those two. I'd been wanting to read this book for quite a while now, and I was really happy that it like met my expectations and exceeded them and was really great. The only thing is I loved where the book ended up, but there was kind of like a time where we kind of think we're going in one direction, and I really didn't like that little sections kind of kicking like the characters a little bit, but I really did fall in love with the characters. I fell in love with the relationships between the characters, the character arcs and everything. So it's really a beautiful book, and I think I definitely read it at a good time. It's definitely like you should check trigger warnings for depression, suicide and stuff like that, but it's a really meaningful book, and I really enjoyed it a lot more than I was expecting I would. The next book I read was Wild Dark Shore by Charlotte McConaughey. This follows a family, single dad, 3 kids, who are living on this island in Antarctica, and they are caretakers. So they take care of the island and like the research equipment there. And this woman washes ashore, and they all kind of like, band together to help her. There's some storms coming through, so they're all kind of having to work together, but she is there for reasons that she has not told them, and they have secrets that they're keeping from her. So it's all kind of unraveling in a little bit of like a thrillery element as well, which is pretty interesting. I ended up giving this 3.5 stars. I had pretty high expectations going into this, which I tried not to, and I did really enjoy it. The themes were really interesting. There was a lot of isolation that you're kind of seeing, and the impact that it would have on especially these children growing up in this environment and then having this new stranger like brought into the mix. It was really interesting, and I did really like the thrillery elements, but I don't know what it was. Like, on paper, I should have loved it more. I just don't think it hit the mark for me. The character development as well was really interesting. I'm not sure if this is a spoiler, but the family is like the research station that they're mining is being shut down. So they're kind of preparing mentally to be leaving this island they've lived in for like a decade, I think. So it's quite like an interesting, again, like transition period that everyone's kind of navigating with a new element. I don't know. I wasn't like reaching for it. I felt like it kind of dragged on at certain points. I'm not sure that I necessarily saw where it was going, but it kind of maybe it wasn't as satisfying. I do think that it kind of undid some of the like character work that had been done with like the results of the thriller twists, which was a little bit annoying. And yeah, I don't know what to tell you. It just didn't have like 4 5-star magic. I think maybe because it followed The Wedding People, it wasn't the fairest. But I do think like it was really well written. I would highly recommend it. Honestly, it was a very good book. So just because I was like madly in love with it doesn't mean that it wasn't great. Also, it was 3.5 stars, so like it's not like it was a 2-star or anything. It was pretty good. The next book I read was The Stolen Queen by Fiona Davis. This book follows dual timelines. So we have Charlotte, who went on a Egyptian dig back in like 1930s. And so we're following that timeline. And then we are also following Charlotte in the 1970s, where she is working at the Metropolitan Museum, I believe, in New York City. And there's a new girl that's coming in as like an assistant to a different department, but they kind of have some interactions. And then something Charlotte is working on in present day is like tying back to stuff that she'd been trying to lock away and run away from in the past. You know how these stories go. I did really enjoy this. I gave it 3.25 stars, which does seem a little bit crazy after giving Wild Dark Shore only 3.5 stars, because that is definitely much better book objectively. But I really enjoyed the Egyptology element of this. I always love kind of Egyptian history and stuff, so I did really like the tie-in to that. And I do love a museum like or art gallery kind of tie-in as well. I just don't think it was written amazingly. Like, the story was very interesting. I always love a dual timeline, but it just, I don't know, the characters didn't really pack that much of a punch. You could tell that the author was trying to make the characters really going through stuff, and there's some really deep moments, and she's working through a lot, but I was like, I just didn't really care that much. Like, that sounds terrible, but I just wasn't super connected to her. I didn't really have a lot of reason to care about her. Her inner monologue as well was not annoying, but just felt very superficial at times. It didn't feel like we were actually getting to peek behind the curtain that much when you're like listening to her thoughts. It was just like, okay, I got that from what you were saying and what your actions were. This is not revealing in any way. Their character development as well was not very satisfying of a payoff. It kind of was like very predictable. Actually, one of them was very predictable, and then the other one was like out of nowhere. And I'm like, okay, that did not. We were doing this character arc, and then like this resolution came out of nowhere, which I did just find a little bit disappointing. And then there's a little bit of like amateur sleuthing, which there's always suspension of disbelief there, but that was a bit like, okay. But overall, it's like a fun read. Definitely like enjoy the setting, and the plot was interesting. I just don't think it was very like, there wasn't a lot of depth to it. The next two books are both 5-star reads by Janice Hallett, which I actually covered in a different video, so I'm not going to go into a lot of depth, but I read the Twyford Code and the Examiner. So Janice Hallett does like mixed media mystery novels, so it's not like written narrative. You get like emails or texts and different audio files, different mediums, and then both of these were very interesting. The Twyford Code is following a man who has gotten out of jail and then is working to solve like the disappearance of his school teacher. And then the Examiner was about an external examination board looking into what they thought was like a disappearance or a murder of a student on a course. So very rudimentary summary of both of those books, but I don't want to go into detail because I did do a whole video about both of those, which I'll link below so you guys can go check it out. The next book I read was An Elderly Lady is Up to No Good by Helene Thurston. I ended up giving this 3 stars. This is a collection of short stories about an elderly Swedish lady who basically just kills people who get in her way. It was a fun read. Like, it was very quick, little short read, and it was interesting. I do think it got a little bit repetitive because after the first short story, it kind of loses the shock value that this like sweet elderly old lady is murdering people in horrific ways solely because they mildly inconvenience her. And I think as well because it's back to back, like if it had been a full novel, it might not have felt as like kind of overdone. But I do think it was fun. The writing was pretty good. I do think some of the mysteries were quite interesting. Like, it was ridiculously intricate for no reason. I did like the main character. She was like, had quite a funny attitude of like, I'm an elderly lady and no one's going to suspect me, and I've lived through too much to have to put up with this as well, which was fun. But I just think, obviously there's some suspension of disbelief there, but yeah, it's a fun little read. The next book I read was The Enchanted April by Elizabeth von Arnim. I gave this 2 stars. This is actually going to be in another upcoming video of mine, so I'm not going to go into a lot of detail, but it basically follows this one woman who answers a newspaper article advertising an Italian villa and then rounds up 3 strangers to split the rent with her and then stay at the villa with her for the month of April. So I will be going to depth in this future video, which I will link below once it's out, but keep your eyes out for that. The next book I read was Now I See You by Shannon Wirt. I ended up giving this 2 stars. This is a thriller that is set in Aspen. We're following a news reporter from Denver who is accepting a new job in Los Angeles, but then finds out that she has inherited this property in Aspen, so goes there for like a, I think, 2-month break. And then she turns up, finds a body, and then there's like a bunch of murders happening, like a serial killer vibe going. My grandfather recommended this to me, so I ended up reading it because of him, but otherwise I definitely wouldn't have read it. It was, interesting to say the least. There was just so much going on. There was so many different characters. I didn't love kind of how long it went on. There was a lot of just like mundane day-to-day life, which I think, especially because they had tried to do a little bit of like a thriller kind of scary aspect to it, it was like lost a bit because you just had mundane life going on in between. I do think it was her debut novel. I'm sort of being too harsh, but like it did show like the writing was a little bit all over the place in some places. It definitely did need more editing, both in like clarity and there was just errors throughout it. Overall, I do think it was like a fun story. I definitely did not see the murderer coming at all, almost to the point where I'm like, okay, that just felt like you were sprinkling these clues and then just came out of nowhere. And I think because she was going for that shock value, it was a little bit frustrating because we didn't make any progress. Like, I think the murderer, he was doing like serial killer murders, and I think he did 2 or 3 of those, and then he had to do like 3 or 4 other murders to protect his identity. So So this guy has killed like 5 to 7 people, and they keep talking about how safe Aspen is and how there's no like crime or murders now. There's all this stuff going on, and the police are making no progress, and that was just wild. So I think that was a little bit frustrating because it didn't like the police weren't ever making any headway, and then there was like just stupid elements in it. As someone that's read a lot of mystery, it was just a little bit frustrating. And yeah, I did find out this is a series, and the whole time we're following this main girl, Georgia, who has moved, and she's like the news anchor lady. And then I found out that the series, I don't think is following her, it's following the detective, who had a rather minor role because like Georgia tries to solve the mystery a little bit herself and is doing amateur detective work, so we're kind of following her, and then we get little bits and bobs from the detective. So that was also just a little bit strange. It did like a multi-perspective thing too, which I usually love, and especially love in thrillers, but it was very disorganized in this. Like it would be split a chapter between two people's like POVs or just randomly changing around, and there was no like this chapter's this person, this chapter's this person, which was kind of a bit frustrating, especially because they tried to do like the ending a chapter on a cliffhanger, and there's so many characters, it's kind of hard to remember by the time we get back round to that person. Like it doesn't feel satisfying to resolve because so much other stuff has happened, and it's not like interesting stuff, it's just like I had to read 50 pages in between that, and it wasn't labeled, so I don't really remember kind of thing. So I do think that like these could all be improved. Again, it's just, I don't want to be too harsh, but like it's just debut-y stuff, I think. But overall it was an interesting story, and I do think the murdering aspect was interesting, but yeah, it definitely didn't need to go on for that long. I also started 2 books this quarter and didn't finish them, but I'm still like working my way through. The first one I think is pretty excusable because it's The Count of Monte Cristo, which I'm reading on my Kobo because I don't want to get carpal tunnel from holding that tome. I have been wanting to read this book for years, and so far I am absolutely loving it. I think I'm like 6% through, so not very far at all. But so far I'm really loving the characters, I'm loving the setup. I think a lot of it is anticipation because it's regarded by so many people as like the best story you'll ever read kind of thing. So I'm definitely very excited and, you know, looking forward to seeing where it goes. The other book I started this year is Rouge by Mona Awad. I'm also really loving this book. I've actually started annotating it because the themes are just really well done so far and super interesting, and I'm really enjoying kind of reading those and looking out for it. So I think I'm like 20% of the way through that, so I'm not very far either. But yeah, really enjoying that as well. Alright guys, that is it for today's video, going through my Q1 2026 reads. I'm definitely a little bit behind schedule. I think I only read like 8 books. I think a lot of it is because I have started reading books that aren't on my TBR or are like specifically for videos instead of being a bit strict with that. So I've lost a little bit of my enjoyment and momentum with reading, but I'm getting it back. I'm reading stuff that I actually want to read, so I'm excited to just kind of go with the flow and read what I want to read. Let me know what you guys read in Q1 and what is on your April TBR. I would love to hear. And yeah, hope to see you guys in another video soon.